second-degree Masons. But P-Tech wasn't the only software firm that was involved with the massive breakdown in communication on 9/11. Because the attacks involved systems used by the FAA, NORAD, and the U.S. Air Force, the conspirators would have needed super user access to the command and control centers of these three separate organizations. One such company is MITRE Corporation. Indara Singh, an IT consultant who previously worked on a Defense Advanced Research Project, or DARPA project, and who was employed by J.P. Morgan on 9/11 in risk management, pointed to MITRE's role at the FAA during the 9/11 Citizens Commission hearings in New York in September 2004. Quote, P-Tech was with the MITRE Corporation in the basement of the FAA for 2 years prior to 9/11, Singh said. Quote, their specific job is to look at interoperability issues the FAA had with NORAD and the Air Force in the case of an emergency. If anyone was in a position to know that the FAA, that there was a window of opportunity or to insert software or to change anything, it would have been P-Tech along with MITRE. Unquote. The MITRE Corporation is a major defense contracting organization headed by the former Director of Central Intelligence, or DCI, which was none other than Jew Dr. James Rodney Schlesinger. Schlesinger, who was reportedly made DCI at the request of Henry Kissinger in 1973, later served as Secretary of Defense. Schlesinger, a former Director of Strategic Studies at the RAND Corporation, was described in a 1973 biography as a devout Lutheran, although he was born in New York in 1929 to immigrant Jewish parents from Austria and Russia. Schlesinger earned 3 degrees from Harvard University. Schlesinger's father, an accountant, founded the accounting firm Schlesinger and Haas and was a trustee and chairman of the budget of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. His father was also a member of the New York State Grand Lodge of Masons. On 17th October 2001, Michelle Moad reported in the Mercury of Philadelphia that 2 men were caught by federal immigration authorities with detailed footage of the Sears Tower in Chicago, Illinois. The authorities described them as Middle Eastern men. Police arrived on the scene due to a call from Pizzeria Uno, a restaurant whose manager reported that the men had a tractor trailer and were dumping something described as a pile of furniture at the rear of the pizzeria. Of the 2 men, one identified himself as Moshe Almakayas, age 30. This person fled the scene, according to police. The manager of the restaurant reported to the officers that the vehicle read Moving Systems Incorporated and included a phone number. The Middle Eastern man, later identified as Ron Qatar, age 23, exited the vehicle and said that the operator, 30-year-old Moshe Almakayas, was across the street. He was spotted with a Jewish female, Eilert Reisler, age 23, across the street, but she soon began to walk in the opposite direction of Almakayas as soon as she was spotted by the police. When Reisler was apprehended, searched, and questioned, she was found to have a German passport in her name and medication in another. Getting back to Almakayas, he stated that he didn't dump any furniture behind the restaurant and that he was on his way to a customer in New York. He was unable to provide either an address or phone number for the customer. When an arriving officer examined the vehicle, it was found to be in numerous violations and even not in safe working order, and was subsequently put out of commission. The truck was, in fact, loaded to 3/4 capacity with household items, boxes, and furniture. Officer Gerald Swartz of the Whitpain Police Department found a video camera amongst the load. Plymouth police officer David McCann reviewed the tape and found that it had footage of Chicago, but suspiciously had numerous zoom-in shots of the Sears Tower. The 3 suspects were eventually questioned by the FBI and detained by INS. The Israelis were eventually released, but coupled with the antics of the dancing Jews that were caught on 9/11 and their front company, Urban Moving Systems, and these suspicious characters and their supposed moving company, is it possible that the plane that went down in Pennsylvania was intended for the Sears Tower in Chicago before the aircraft made an abrupt change of course over the state of Ohio?
Israeli Mossad terrorist operations extend to numerous countries. Here is just one example apart from 9/11 and others that we have briefly covered. As reported in La Voz de Altasan, two men posing as press photographers, one of them a former Israeli colonel and Mossad agent, were arrested inside the Mexican Congress on October 10, 2001, armed with 9mm pistols, 9 grenades, explosives, 3 detonators, and 58 bullets, but were released following intense pressure from the Israeli embassy. The report stated, "We believe that the two Zionist terrorists were going to blow up the Mexican Congress. The second phase was to mobilize both the Mexican and U.S. press to blame Osama bin Laden. Most likely then Mexico would declare war on Afghanistan as well, commit troops, and all the oil it could spare to combat Islamic terrorism." As reported in La Voz de Altasan, Los Angeles, Alta California. In a mind-blowing development, La Voz de Altasan has learned that the Mexican Army General Rafael Marcial Macedo de la Concha, who heads la Procuraduría General de la República, that's the Mexican Department of Justice, has released the retired Israeli Defense Force Colonel and presumed Mossad agent Salvador Gerexin Smeki, an Israeli illegal immigrant, Sar Ben Zevi, after both had penetrated the security of the Mexican Congress and were in possession of guns, hand grenades, and explosives. This morning, La Voz de Altasan had a personal telephone interview with Mexican Congressional Press Secretary, Licenciada Adriana Lopez, and verified the arrest of two Israelis after they had entered through the highly secure front entrance of the Palacio Legislativo de San Larzo. She stated to La Voz de Altasan that the two terrorists had taken advantage of the situation that had occurred about 1700 hours of Wednesday, October 10th, when a large contingent of sugar industry unionists were entering through the metal detectors. The two Israelis followed about 50 of the unionists to the office of the President of Mexican Congress, Beatriz Paredes. The two Israelis were first pretending to be press photographers, but called attention to the sugar unionists because of their nervous and out-of-ordinary behavior. About 10 of the unionists confronted them and observed that they were carrying guns and what looked to them to be explosives. They held the two Israelis until official congressional security personnel took them into custody. The head of congressional security, Salvador Alarc, verified that the Israelis had in their possession 9 grenades, sticks of dynamite, detonators, wiring, and 2mm Glock automatics. Mexican Congressional Press Secretary Licenciada Adriana Lopez informed La Voz de Altasan in the telephone interview that congressional security then turned the terrorists Salvador Gerexin Smeki, age 34, and Sar Ben Zevi, age 27, to the Procuraduría General de la República, Mexican Department of Justice, which is headed by Mexican Army General Rafael Marcial Macedo de la Concha. Initial reports by the Procuraduría General de la República, PGR, were that both Israelis worked for a private security agency and that they both had gun permits. It turned out that there was no connection to either suspect to any private security agency. The PGR has released the retired Israeli IDF colonel with the official explanation that he had a legal permit to carry a gun. They also released the illegal Israeli immigrant on about $4,000 bail and had the case turned over to the Mexican immigration authorities. Mexican Congressional Press Secretary Licenciada Adriana Lopez was surprised to hear from La Voz de Altasan of the release of the two Israelis. La Voz de Altasan has also learned that the Israeli embassy used heavy-handed measures to have the two Israelis released. Very high-level emergency meetings took place between Mexican Secretary of Foreign Relations Jorge Gutman General Misado de la Concha, and a top Ariel Sharon envoy who flew to Mexico City especially for that purpose. Elias Luff of the Israeli embassy worked night and day, and their official spokeswoman, Hilla Engelhardt, went into high gear after many hours of complete silence. What went on during those high-level meetings, no one knows, but many in Mexico are in disbelief at their release. Guns and any kind of explosive is highly illegal for Mexican citizens, and the fact that these two Israelis had them inside the Mexican Congress makes their release highly suspect. What is really going on? Jorge Gutman, the Mexican Foreign Secretary, has very strong Zionist connections and himself is of the Jewish descent. Mexican Army General Misado de la Concha has strong connections to the U.S. military-industrial complex and through this to the Israeli Defense Forces. Have any of these connections influenced the decisions to release the two Zionists?
Former Italian President Francisco Cossega, who revealed the existence of Operation Gladio, told Italy's oldest and most widely read newspaper that the 9/11 terrorist attacks were run by the Mossad, and that this was common knowledge among global intelligence agencies. In what translates awkwardly into English, Cossega told the newspaper Corriere della Sera, all the intelligence services of America and Europe know well that the disastrous attack has been planned and realized from the Mossad with the aid of the Zionist world in order to put into accusation the Arabic countries and in order to induce the Western powers to take part in Iraq and Afghanistan, unquote. The script for Missing Links was originally over 5 hours. Due to time constraints, many key individuals with established connections to 9/11 could not be examined. Here are a few ancillary pieces of evidence and information which you may research in greater detail on your own. It is possible that these will be exhaustively addressed in another film by the makers of Missing Links or by other investigators in the future. We encourage you to do your due diligence in investigation. Jack Abramoff. He entertained the supposed lead